Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Historical Laboratory. I'm Dr. Anne Wohlcke, historian, and this is the show where we investigate historical questions through an unconventional lens. Think of the show as part workshop, part research investigation, historical observation, and this is where we really look at history in a different way from what you probably learned in school. We're going to be looking at some esoteric wisdom and spiritual questions in a way that you normally wouldn't see in textbooks. So today I have a special guest with me, and let's bring him in. We've got Gemini Brett, Earth astrologer, who will be with us today to investigate the design and layout and esoteric hidden mysteries of Washington, D.C. Hello.
Greetings, and DC, a temple of the stars, intriguingly.
Yes, yeah. The more I'm learning about it, the more I see that it was definitely intended to be a temple to something other than a monarch and something other than God, but probably a temple to liberty in a way, right?
Yeah, I mean, the second of those I wonder about. But one thing I can say for sure is it's like not really working anymore. Or maybe it is, but it seems that like a lot of these esoteric keys to Washington, D.C. have maybe been forgotten. Like we'll visit one of the most esoteric places in the DC temple, and now it's said to be a broom closet.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
say something about how governance has been in the states currently and probably for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's the other thing that stood out to me while investigating this is just how thoughtful the founders were about the planning of the city and the planning of every aspect of the government, of not just governmental ideas about how it would be structured, but the actual spaces in which things would happen. So it was very thoughtfully planned, and this was at a time during the Enlightenment when people really thought of landscape and architecture as something that would communicate particular values. And in this case, it was supposed to be values connected to the Roman Republic, which was the one example that our founders could think of when they thought of trying to imagine a place that would exist without a monarch, right?
Mm.
And so we really see that in the planning of DC. I don't know. Maybe I'm actually going to show just a second here. What am I sharing right now? I want to show Pierre Charles L'Enfant's original plan for the city. If we could just start with that. But of course, I need to find the right window here. So this is actually not his original plan, but it is the one that became engraved. So this is the person who's responsible for coming up with the idea of how the capital city would be laid out. It's L'Enfant's idea.
One
And
of the people is important to say.
sorry,
One of the people. Yeah,
one
there
of
were
the
many
people.
people involved, and L'Enfant tends to get the nod these days, although he was released before it was finished.
Yes, yeah, he
Some folks
was.
who aren't often spoken of are like Benjamin Banneker, who was a black man, who
Mm-hmm.
was very much aligned and maybe like the lead astronomer on
Yes.
duty. And then Thomas Ellicott as well, who was said to kind of take L'Enfant's place when L'Enfant was released. And many suggest that Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, who were both, architects and surveyors. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
architect relating to Jefferson and surveyors to both of them were both like principally involved, and probably some folks we don't know about too.
Right. Yeah. And so L'Enfant was the person that George Washington specifically reached out and said, "Hey, I want you to come up with the design for Washington, D.C." Sorry, I've got people gardening outside of my window at the moment. Um, I thought they were done. Is that horribly loud?
I can't hear it.
Okay, good. I think while I'm talking, it's canceling that out. Um, so L'Enfant was a military engineer that Washington knew, and I wanted to start sort of with the person who's been deemed to be the architect. So let me show also a picture of L'Enfant. If I can get over here. I think I have to stop sharing and then reshare so we can see him. All right. So this is the mysterious man who has been deemed to be the architect of DC, and he's a Frenchman. He was an engineer that Washington knew from the Revolutionary War. So this is a guy who grew up with a father who was an architect and artist for the king in France. So somebody who was very well connected, and he was trained in all of the classical architectural techniques of the Enlightenment. And Paris was definitely the capital of all of that sort of design. So I just wanted to show some of what influenced his ideas. This is actually not a very good map. Let's look at this one because it's more contemporary. So this is an overview of Versailles Palace outside of Paris. This was the seat of the king. And you can see the idea of the geometric lines, and the idea for the viewer in the 18th century would have been the king is sitting right here at the middle of all of this design, and he's got views out the front of his windows that extend all the way to Paris, if he could see that far. Right. If he had a telescope, he can look down those boulevards and see towards Paris. And then in the back, it's geometrically laid out so he can see all of the lands and gardens behind him. So the idea here would be that this absolutist monarch in France has his eye on everyone, right? He is the seat of power. He's the center of power.
And before you leave the screen, let me just point
Yeah.
out the obvious cross that everybody sees there.
Yes.
But on the right, it's the compass, right? So the Freemasons compass, because we're going to see both of those elements also in the layout of Washington, D.C. And
Right.
that's a really important part of
Yeah.
these folks that you all should know, right? Is the kind of esoteric secret brotherhood that all of these, so-called founding fathers and their crew belong to.
Yes, yeah. L'Enfant was a member of the Freemasons. It's interesting that the man who took over, Ellicott, was a Quaker, I think, and not a member of the Freemasons, if I'm correct. But we'll get into that. And then another aspect of what he looked at when he was planning the design was the design of Paris. And this is not a great image because I couldn't find a good free version of the image. Most of them have stamps over the top of them of whoever holds the copyright. But this is just a picture of the street layout in Paris. And again, the idea is to have these geometric streets. This is an older version. This is pre-19th century. So if you go to Paris today, it looks a whole lot different because in the 19th century, there was an effort to just roll out all the old neighborhoods and create grand boulevards and make Paris a bright and shiny modern city. So this is partly there, right, with some of the geometric layout. So that's what L'Enfant was supposedly up to, was creating that sort of a geometric layout for a city. But I'm curious about what you have to share about how the city got plotted out and planned, and why they chose the particular area they did to plan it.
Well, one thing I'd suggest for folks who really want to dive deep into the subject is a book by David Oveson, which is called The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital. And maybe you could bring up an image of that book cover if you would. I mean, it's interesting that David Oveson says the secret architecture of our nation's capital because he's an Englishman. And that kind of makes me wonder whose capital Washington, D.C. is. But we don't need to go too deep into the Scorpio Joe side of Gemini Brett. I will say that when I first visited DC with eyes open, in some regards, thanks to this work by David Oveson, The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, also to the work of William Henry inside the US Capitol building specifically, that I was really seeing DC for the way that the city streets were aligned to stars. I will say that what I found there, I found something that I'd suggest kind of disagrees with Oveson's principal theory. And that the star alignments, like the major star alignments that he saw, like I didn't think really worked that well. And then I saw something totally different. So I'll share that with you today. I'm going to share a bunch of pictures. But this book is super cool. I want to find another title. I'm forgetting what it is, but for folks who are out in DC, there's this like walking tour of Masonic Washington or something, which is a really great book also to grab because it shows you just how to get from one of the gazillion zodiacs in DC to the next. Washington, DC has more public zodiacs in fountains, paintings, lanterns, statues, than any other city in the world. So for the astrologer, it's like a really wonderful place to go play. And touring around DC, and I've led tours there as well, it really has helped me start to look up. I mean, not only to the stars, but to the buildings, and parts of buildings that typically are stories and stories above our heads, or, like here in the Bay Area where I live in San Francisco, there's some amazing zodiacs around that you would totally miss if you weren't looking. And then simple things like there's a Trinity alley, and at the end of it, 333 Trinity, which is just so Hermes. And you pop out the other side, and you're looking at the post office with a statue of Mercury, And so, what are these folks up to? What's the point of this? And I think Oveson's work, he's really trying to share that he feels DC was this temple to the virgin, to the priestess, to the goddess. And he shows all of these charts for significant dates like the laying of the cornerstone of the Capitol building or of the White House, right? Where there'd be these full Masonic ceremonies and full regalia and marches through the streets. But he's also estimating the times when the ceremonies would have happened, and he's doing some cool detective work around that. Like, the history shows this is the time that this march began. This is how long it would take to march from here to there. But every time it's just like Virgo rising, Virgo this, Virgo that, because that's his principal theory, is that DC was all of a celebration of the priestess. And I don't have this to show right now, although I'll say you can find it in the brilliant work of Scott Onstott, which is really what first introduced me to some of the secrets in plain sight. And that's the name of a collection of videos that Onstott created, Secrets in Plain Sight. And there's a Secrets in Plain Sight Volume 2 that are amazing. And it starts the first one in DC, and then you're off to Giza and just all over the place, and looking at how one of these, designed cities is aligned to another one and to the ancient sites. And I mean, it's absolutely incredible. And this kind of work has been brought forth by many different researchers over time. This, esoteric layout of places like Rome and Paris and London, and how London was realigned after the Great Fire and all of these things, right?
Yeah. And those who designed the Capitol layout they would have consulted with Christopher Wren. He's the person who came up with that post-fire design for London as well. But they all knew this. This is what they were studying when they looked at classical architecture and urban design. They would have known that within the Roman Republic, it was thought, and I'm sure it went way beyond this, right? But they're studying the Romans, and they knew that when a city was founded, it had to be laid out according to certain directional qualities, and that it would have been different gods or values would have been invoked when each part of the city was built or dedicated. And they definitely played this out in Washington, D.C. And I know you're going to go into more of that. And I want to show one more thing for people who are interested in looking at more of this information easily. If you can't get the books quite yet, I don't know where the Freemason tour is of that you're talking about, because you said there's a
I'll
book.
find that book.
Yeah, but there's a website here, just how did Freemasonry influence the design of Washington, D.C.? And it just goes over some of these basic ideas. This is an image that, if people have watched me on History and the Stars with David Palmer, we've looked at this image, which I don't know if you might be looking at this as well, Brett, but
Yeah, I can see it on my screen. So that's the laying of the cornerstone of the Capitol building here.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
and you notice the apron he's wearing, it's not because he was just cooking something. He is wearing the Freemasons regalia. So yeah. All right.
Yeah. This book is, let me see here. Oh, I don't know if you're seeing a larger version. The Secrets of Masonic Washington, a guidebook to the signs, symbols, and ceremonies at the origin of American's capital by James Wasserman. That's a amazing book if you're on the streets out walking around. It just leads you from here to there to there. Actually, some of the statues are now missing. They've been brought down during Black Lives Matter happenings years ago, right? Right. I mean, I want to retrograde back to this thing that you said, that they would have consulted Christopher Wren. Right. So isn't this the great American Revolution against the Brits? And yet you're saying that there's, Americans who are somehow teaming up with other esoteric members of the society from Britain to do such things like lay out the Capitol building.
Right.
So it's just a little bit intriguing to study, taught history versus some of the things that perhaps
Mm-hmm.
were actually going down. I mean, you can even see perhaps that the crown funded the American side of the revolution. That's a tale for another time. Yeah, there's interesting things that Ovison shares. And by the way, for people who want to take a deeper dive into some of the things I'll show you today, though, I'm going to show you an updated version because I'm getting better with the graphics and the such. But if you head to my website, which is GeminiBrett.com, let's see if I can find this one. Well, I'll just share the whole screen because there's so much going on at this point. Yeah, so at GeminiBrett.com. Is this on your screen, Anne? My website, Jupiter here in Sedona. Oh, I can't hear you anymore.
Yes, it was. It was on the screen just now.
Okay, cool.
I'm
Let me
sorry.
see.
I muted because they were right under my window with a leaf blower.
All right. Well, I think this should be here. So you'll see at my website. But first of all, a newsletter. So sign up because some of the things I'm going to show you today. They're going to be built into a course, an esoteric astronomy course that I'm currently designing. That I think those of you who are intrigued by this share will also be really deeply interested in. But if you click this videos tab at my website, you can find a video called Washington Deciphered, um, the Star Mysteries of Washington, D.C. And that was something I made years and years ago. Still, I feel like my favorite work that I've done is around DC. So I've made some revelations since, but that shows a lot about some of what Ovison has to share, and then how with feet on the ground in DC, I found that one of his principal star theories, for me, it just didn't really work. Which, by the way, is that the Capitol building, the Washington Monument, and the White House, which form kind of a right triangle, which is very key, obviously, to the Pythagorean mysteries. We see it in the Masonic tradition. And I got to say, I only look at that from the very outside anyway. So what do I know? But that they work Regulus and Spica and Arcturus in the sky. But when I went out there, and I intentionally went at a time where I could see that alignment, it was like backwards and flipped around. I just don't think it really works. But as I was there and walking around, I stumbled onto a whole other thing that I think is absolutely the truth. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. I do get to it in that video that you can get to through GeminiBrett.com and work my way up to it. But today I'm going to show you some of kind of like the big reveal. And not show you all the little things that I love to share. So our baby Maya, Anne and I both have a baby girl, Maya. Less of a baby than mine. Our girl turned 1 year old yesterday, and
Oh, yay! Happy birthday to Maya.
Thank you. My solo baby moon trip was I took a solo trip to DC to go take some new photographs and really get around and kind of align with some of these things. I'm so intrigued by it.
Wow.
Yeah,
Well,
and at some point when I'm traveling a lot again, I'll start leading tours out there once more.
Well, definitely, you might need a historian along with you. I'm happy to go.
I think I will, and I'm really glad you're here today and invited me to share, because at the end of this, we're going to get to some different periods in the history of the states that are being reactivated right now. I will just say it's a little worrisome because previously we're looking at the Civil War and World War II, and we're kind of coming up to some astrological, and what I'll show you today is some astronomical alignments that speak to those times. This is one other thing I want to reflect upon. What you shared is like this idea of when you create a city, right? Like you call in a patron, and that going all the way back to Romulus and Rome, and probably well before that, and Kemet, the land we call Egypt now, and everywhere in the world, this was something that was done esoterically, and it didn't involve the public, you know? And when you get to some of the writing of these people, it's really sad what they think of the public, you know. And in a way, it feels like they're doing this to create like a great city that will be a place for people to reside peacefully. But the people are referred to as the vulgar, you know, or like it's like the sheep, right? So there's some people like these elites who are here to be the shepherds, and I very much question that. And so it's my relationship to Washington D.C., for example, is very interesting because it's like, what is the intention of these people? Like, I can show you the alignments that were done. I can say, were I to align a city, I would do things in many similar ways. And every time I'm there, there's new discoveries that come in that I find just absolutely amazing. And I very much admire like this work that was done. There's this weird thing that happens to me in DC, and I know I'm not the only one, but there's this like patriotism that just like happens, you know? And I have a lot of, I don't know, I'd say suggest maybe resistance to that.
Yeah, I agree. I've spent 2 summers in Washington, D.C., where I got to be on the National Mall for the fireworks and sitting right there by the Capitol building. And I have to say, no matter what we think or how cynical we can be about patriotism and all of that now, when you're sitting there on the National Mall watching these fireworks, it is an American experience. You are surrounded by people of every creed, class, race, everything. People, international people, Americans. You're listening to the military bands. You're listening to the cheesy like B artists, people who were famous years and years ago, but they come forward and sing all the patriotic songs. It's wonderful. And then you're sitting there in this awful, god awful humidity for people like me from a desert, and you spend a lot of time growing up in a desert. You almost die from the humidity. But it's amazing. And the thing I want to say about DC, when you mentioned that um, in the olden days when people evoked spirits to protect their city and all of that, it really was planned from the perspective of the elites as much as, you know, if we go back to the old democratic examples of Rome, or Republican examples, there was a space for the people, but it was still such a really elite group. And I do want to say that that our founders thought, and of course the leaf blower is right under my window. Do you hear that loudly, or is that just me?
Yeah, but it's just kind of a nice background. It's fine.
um, our founders thought they were creating the most representative system that there had ever been. And they were from their perspective. But what's interesting about that layout is the amount of space given to the public in the National Mall, that's part of the design, that there would be this great national concourse where people can gather and come together and do whatever it is that they do. Now you go, it's got lots of monuments, it's got the different branches of the Smithsonian, it's got a carousel, it's got the Botanic Gardens, sort of the idea that we can all come together and do these free things, and all of those places are free. But
Yeah,
that
yeah,
didn't
but we
develop
pay
until,
for them with our
no,
tax
are you
dollars.
we gladly pay for them. But anyway, the that what I find interesting is that wasn't even developed until 1900. That was the original idea, but for years it was land that I think they had sort of, they did have entertainments, fairs, those sorts of things. They, some people farmed on the land. A railroad went across that land for a while. They had to remove those tracks. So the public aspect of it didn't really get realized until I think it's 1901. I'm going to mute for a minute so you can
Yeah,
go
well, I'll
on.
share a bunch of slides and then check in with you on the other side. Yeah, and just to say as well that this was a swamp, right? In fact, much of what's in DC now, and I'll share some of this in images, like it's not in the L'Enfant plan because it was literally in the Potomac River. So like where the Jefferson Memorial is now, for example, like that was river. And so at the time of the building of DC, like they were battling mud and funk and um, yeah, there's some things I think I'll just not share so we don't go fully dark here. Um, but anyway, let me share some pictures with y'all and buttons, one of these. Okay. And so this is just a little bit from esoteric astronomy series that I'm putting together that speaks about the turning of the ages. So you'll see this question of, is this the spawning of the age of Aquarius? And there's a reason why I want to ask this question and speak about the turning of the ages and galactic alignment and things we don't really have time for today, because this is very much in the cosmic code that is Washington, D.C. So go to this old book in the New Testament, Mark 14:12. We read, and the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, his disciples said unto him, where wilt thou that we go and prepare that thou mayest eat the Passover? And he sendeth forth two of his disciples, and saith unto them, go ye into the city, and there shall meet you a man bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him. And he will shew you a large upper room furnished and prepared. There make ready for us. And his disciples went forth and came into the city and found as he had said unto them, and they made ready for the Passover. And in the evening he cometh with the 12. The 12, interesting, these 12 disciples are 12 signs through which the Christ, the Son, travels. And of course, the 13th, the Mary, perhaps the moon. So this is often invoked by astrologers as Christ describing the coming of the age of the water bearer, the dawning of the age of Aquarius, right? But when will it be? Which is a great riddle of esoteric astronomy. Um, and I believe Christ gives us a very important key on the next page, in that we're tasked to look at a place that we typically wouldn't, or square to a place we typically would. Because if you're familiar with the turning of the ages, kind of astronomical mechanism, we look at the precession of the equinoxes, and often we'll look at where the Aries point, the Pisces Aries cusp of the tropical zodiac, which in a sense works like a global ascendant, because that point is due east of the center of the earth where we all connect. I love to teach that, like so many sacred systems of ancient wisdom traditions, the tropical zodiac is directionally aligned. So just a quick image of that. Gaia's spine, or the sword of our stone, or the world tree, leans forever towards the place on the sun's path that in tropical astrology we call zero Cancer. It's right above the Tropic of Cancer. So many people these days, because signs and constellations are not the same, will suggest that the tropical zodiac is just some symbolic relic that doesn't work anymore, or some other such nonsense. And I'm here and so devoted to help astrologers reclaim their connection to the living sky and remember the keys of the ancient astronomy. And the tropical zodiac, it's beautiful, elegant, simple astronomy. It's really earth astronomy. It's all about the earth. So the cardinal directions are defined by the axis of our daily rotation, and that axis leans forever on the sun's path towards the point called zero Cancer, South Pole leaning towards zero Capricorn. So we have a global north and south, and that makes a global west, which is tropical Libra, and east, which is zero Aries. So they call it the vernal point, which is a very hemispheric thing to say, right? Because the sun is there at vernal equinox for the northern hemisphere. But vernal equinox, which means spring, is the autumnal equinox for the southern hemisphere, as we know. So I just call it east equinox, because the truth is that's the time each year when the sun is at this point that is due east of the center of the earth. And it's fun, and you and I are speaking right now with Saturn there. I mean, Saturn and Neptune at zero Aries, and Jupiter here at zero Cancer. You're going to see in these slides how that's a very important part of what's happening now and happening this year 2025. And now that relates us back actually to 1776 in a very Jupiterian way. So we'll end with some astrology charts today, but we're going to get way more into kind of the deep esoteric astronomy first, and then show you how this is like in the street layout of Washington, D.C., but also in a very important painting within the Capitol building as well. Now, the precession of the equinoxes has to do not with the primary motion of Earth, which is our daily rotation, or the secondary motion of Earth, which is our like annual revolution about the sun, but with the tertiary or third motion of Earth, which is the axial precession. And this is the long year, the great year, which is about 26,000 years long. So the esoteric number we use is 1 degree of this great year takes 72 years. And the 72 years per degree times the 360 degree of the precessional circle is 25,920 years. And you can see this perhaps stitched into the long count calendar from the Mayan tradition and into so much of the esoteric tales, right? So as this is happening, the directional zodiac, the tropical zodiac, moves or precesses through the constellations. And we've kind of long looked at this east point, this zero Aries at the tropical zodiac point. Where is it aligned to the stars? And so the idea is once that gets to the stars of the water bearer, this is the age of Aquarius. However, the constellations vary significantly in size. Most argue for equal ages, which will be a 12th of the great year, or 2,160 years. And for that to be done, we need to work with not a constellational zodiac, but a sidereal, star-based heavenly zodiac of 12 equal star signs. And so as the earth signs, that's the tropical zodiac, precess through the star signs, this will speak to us about when we shift from the age of the ram to the age of the fish to the age of the water bearer. I like those terms because I was trained by my first teacher to use terms like water bearer and sea goat for constellations, and terms like Aquarius and Capricorn for signs, because they're different things. But really, this turning of the ages mechanism, it's based upon two gears of 12. The terrestrial set, which is the tropical zodiac, and the celestial set, which is the sidereal zodiac. I say the because sidereal zodiacs are quite arbitrary, and that's kind of a long tail. But what my first teacher, Daniel Gemario, found was that if we're looking at other places, not at the east point, but rather at north and south, we can see that as they precess, we're at a very important time that we've incarnated at this age where the solstice points are moving through the galactic gates. So I just wanted to say that that's really actually the first two classes of this course that I'm creating, and we're going to get to some of really the end of class 3. And that's a lot to digest. So my apologies, and you're welcome.
That's a great summary. So we're ready now for class 3.
Yeah, and so when we look to the north or south point, what's happening now, and I'll show you some images of this, is they are moving, and only once in every 26,000 years do they move in such a way that the solstices, right, and that's a tropical phenomena, right? Tropics coming from the Greek tropikos, which means turnaround, because every year, for example, the sun finds its northern peak, which is the Tropic of Cancer, and then it stops solstice and turns around and goes south for 6 months into the Tropic of Capricorn. And the moon does that every month. The zodiac, by the way, does that every day. And so when we look to the north point, I think we find a very important lock that the keys from this kind of biblical prophecy turn and open an interesting door. So let me get back to where this thing is, and we'll move forward. So it seems that Christ is invoking here the age of Aquarius. And again, for the age of Aquarius, we likely look to that east point, to where 0 tropical Aries is aligned to the stars. So it's really cool that Saturn, not Neptune for the naked eye, but Saturn's bringing our attention there right now. Whereas Jupiter, as Anne and I are recording this in June of 2025, now squaring Saturn from Cancer, is bringing our eyes to another place in the heavens that I feel Christ invokes the next day, right after this Passover, when he was crucified. So we read this from Mark 14:61. But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" "I am," said Jesus, "and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Right? So this is Christ on trial, like being urged to blaspheme publicly so they can justify his crucifixion, right? Well, the sun on the cross is very much a astronomical thing, I'd suggest. And there's a sun on the day cross, which is sunrise and sunset, the cross of the horizon, or solar noon crossing the midheaven, when the sun stops going up every day and starts coming down from daily height, right? The year that happens, of course, at solstice time, but there's also a sun on the cross during the great year, and we've incarnated at this very special time in this great year, this long year, the Platonic year, the 26,000 year precessional year. So what is this? The Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. And it's my feeling again that this is Christ telling us when this thing goes down. And it's less about that water bearer in the sky, that something that sits to its square. And I'm showing this image, which is kind of a superimposed image from two different systems. One, you can see the constellations as we typically know them in the Western tradition, where here you're seeing the sun and actually the moon. This is a solar eclipse on the hand of the high man, Orion. And I'd suggest that's the right hand of the Mighty One. In the clouds of heaven, and anyone who's gone to dark skies knows this to be true, that's the Milky Way band. Well, superimposed over these Western constellations, you're seeing an image from the Lakota tradition, which is the racetrack of the heavens, or the sacred hoop. So I'm going to get back to that at the end. But for now, I want to start with something we'll get back to as well, which is just to say that this center of the hoop on the hand of the high man Orion has been eclipsed 3 times in recent years. The first was June solstice in 1982, and 19 years or one metonic cycle later in 2001. Now, I'm showing Orion here upside down, as to most northern hemispherians are used to seeing it, because this is generally speaking a southern hemisphere eclipse, although it did occult some latitudes in the northern hemisphere and Africa, as you can see on the map to the right. So I'm going to flip this around so you can see that right hand of the Mighty One, the clouds of heaven, right? So you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One, coming on the clouds of heaven. I believe this is like an image of what Christ was foretelling. Now, what is this eclipse about? Well, this was the prenatal eclipse for a very powerful event that is still rocking the globe, right? So here you see the Statue of Liberty, built by some Masons in France, and the Twin Towers, right? Now I want you to just look at that constellational image of Orion with the torch lifted towards the sun in this moment, and the twins, right? The Gemini twins.
Wow.
Just to the side. And this, of course, was the prenatal eclipse for the 9/11 event. Well, 19 years later, that's the metonic cycle, there was a third and final eclipse here on a solstice during this time of galactic alignment. I'll share more about what that means at the end of our jam. And so for years and years and years, I was like, we really need to look out for 2020. And most astrologers were looking to the triple conjunction, or near triple conjunction, of Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto and Capricorn, right? Around 2020, 2019, 2020 is, something's going to go down. Well, I was also looking to this, and I knew that some events in 2001 would very much kind of foretell what was going to happen 19 years later. So we all know that there was something entirely global as well around 2020. And I'd say we are still very much suffering from that weirdness too. And it's a little scary, I'd say, to see where this annular eclipse of June solstice 2020 shadowed on Earth. You can see it's centered here in India, kind of Tibet, which I think is actually interesting. I think you should get away from scary. But like Iran and the Middle East, quite shadowed here, for example. And of course, that's alive in the news currently, as Cancer Jupiter is now squaring Aries Saturn and Neptune. And I think I'd just say that that square of Jupiter and Saturn, which is a third of 3 over this last year, it really is kind of like the sprouting of the seed that was planted when the two of those planets met on December solstice, or I'll call it southstice, because it's when the sun is at Earth's southern lean, 2020, right? When Jupiter and Saturn conjoin the first degree of Aquarius. So there's too much to say about all of this, but I just want to invoke again this image of the Statue of Liberty in New York perhaps being something kind of Orion-ish, and we're going to see that more as we get to DC. So this is a statue of Joan of Arc, who I'm told never held a sword, but rather a flag. And this is at the higher level of Meridian Park. So Meridian Park in Washington, D.C. is just north, and I mean due north of the White House. So many of us know the prime meridian to be in Greenwich, right? Like, who says? Bunch of dudes in wigs, right? Like, I mean, there was actually one vote that the prime meridian would be in the United States. I guess you can imagine who had that vote. Some voted for Paris, right? And in fact, once the prime meridian was laid in Greenwich in the UK, that's when the modern convention of time zones was also laid forth. And the French resisted for decades so that their clocks were off by like about 15 minutes from, so-called universal time, that they didn't have the name back then. And some argue for a prime meridian through the Great Pyramid in Giza because it is the center of the Earth's geodetic landmass, meaning that if you draw diagonals out of the Great Pyramid in every direction, you will hit more land than if you do so out of anywhere else on Earth. So the White House, interesting name, is on 16th, right? Pennsylvania and Meridian, right? So you can walk north of the White House on Meridian, which is a meridian, which means a north-south circle, right? In astronomy, like, we speak of the meridian, which is where the ecliptic intersects the meridian. That's the midheaven. Mm-hmm. Above the ground, and beneath the ground, that's the IC, right? So we work with this in astrology charts all the time. Like, the meridian is your local north-south circle, right? It divides the eastern sky that ups from the western sky that downs. And so with the meridian and the horizon, now we have the cross of matter of the chart, and we can divide it into quadrants and these things, right? But a meridian is also your like local line of longitude, right? Mm-hmm. That heads up to Santa's place and south in the other direction, right? And in DC, that's Meridian Avenue. So interestingly, when you walk out of the White House and you head north, you'll pass a very mysterious building exactly 1 mile north of the White House. Some people call it the real White House, which is the headquarters of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. It's modeled to look like the tomb of Nebuchadnezzar, which is intriguing. And they actually have there a tombstone and a gravestone for George Washington. So that's not where he's buried.
Right.
It said he was meant to be buried in the Capitol building. And that's this tomb that's now a broom closet. But that Washington was rather buried at his home in Mount Vernon.
Right.
We're going to find our way back there with some charts and some amazing star play too. But I just, while there, I'll say this, as Anne was saying before, like, one of the conventions for laying out a city is to align it to the directions. And interestingly, many are not. Like in DC, we're going to see this particular azimuth or compass heading that's in our day and age aligned to the setting of Sirius. But DC also is aligned to the cardinal directions. Like Washington, D.C. is a diamond of 10 square miles. Mm-hmm. That number, which, by the way, can approximate so-called squaring the circle, one of the ancient geometers' challenges. But it's perfectly cardinal. And at the center of that diamond is the Capitol building, right? Which is meant to be we the people.
Right.
So in the center of the Capitol building, there is a compass rose that shows you the very center of DC. I don't have an image of that in the slide, so I just wanted to share that here on waving my hands around. We are going to go to the room above, the floor above that compass, which is where we find the Capitol dome, the rotunda, and a very interesting painting on the ceiling. But beneath that compass, there is the tomb for George Washington. You know, it's said, and you'll hear this on the tour there, that after Washington died, his family buried him at home across the river in Mount Vernon. Um, and that folks convinced Martha Washington, George's wife, of course, to move his body to the Capitol when she herself died, that they would be buried together in the Capitol building, this tomb that was meant for George Washington. But that didn't happen. Martha died. She was buried next to Washington in Mount Vernon, and his family demanded that they stay there. And so now this tomb, they say on the tour, and I haven't gotten to go, and I probably never will, but is a broom closet. Now, my feeling is that that tomb for Washington was never meant for his body, and that maybe it's still being used today, or certainly once was, in the way that the mystery traditions would use the so-called sarcophagus in the Great Pyramid of Giza, which I don't believe was ever meant to be a sarcophagus. Most researchers will show you that no original burial has ever happened inside one of the Egyptian pyramids. Napoleon spent a night in that sarcophagus. Has your study brought you there, Anne?
No.
Yeah, and he said that, you know, if he shared what happened, nobody would believe him anyway. The French in Egypt is a very interesting study. You know, and like, what was Napoleon doing there, and, you know, led a troop of scientists and such. But I believe that Washington, D.C. was in some regards designed to do what the Great Pyramid does. Now, what is that? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Some suggest a Stargate. And what I want to show you today is that, at least like in its design and in the artistry, which came later in time, we see that there is a reference to our day and age, you know, like now, in the Washington, D.C. design.
Wow. So I'm going to interject just a minute here, because as you're talking, I'm thinking of all of the historical facts that I would interject. So if I were giving a talk like this at a historical conference, I probably wouldn't be talking as much about all of the astronomical alignments. But one of the things that's interesting about this time is longitude has just been discovered, right? They finally figured out around this time how to measure longitude predictably, because they had the right clocks to be able to do this at sea. It was a big issue that they weren't able to navigate predictably. So the fact that humans had mastered longitude, it's really interesting that, for example, Pennsylvania Avenue would have been going along a longitude line, right? So you can also look at it from this aspect of, they're using all the most modern techniques in designing this city as well. So they're combining the esoteric aspect of it with being able to do it so precisely. They're using the sacred geometry deliberately, connecting it to astrological features, as people going back to the Egyptians and probably before that had obviously been doing. But now they're demonstrating their ability to do it probably more precisely than at any other time. And then the other thing I was thinking about is this idea of the 0 point line, like the marker for time. Who's going to get to have the 0 line for time? Where does time begin? Of course, it was in the British Empire, of course, at Greenwich officially, but I love how they had this point also in the United States. So if you knew what you're looking at, you can think to yourself, well, of course, time begins here. Because that idea we would see at Versailles too. I don't know if you have you been to the Palace of Versailles?
I have not. Yeah, only on
Um,
Google Earth and in images.
Yes, and that's wonderful. I love Google Earth. And you could probably see it there, because I was looking for an image of this. While I was there, I took a picture of the 0 marker for the mile markers for France. And that all begins right outside the king's window on the ground. So you can actually see there all of the miles from France are measured from that center point. And in constructing that palace, the king was using the most modern scientific understandings of his time, because it was new wisdom that the sun was the center of the solar system. And the king obviously represented, the Sun King represented the sun, and everything in France was designed to revolve around him. So we see an interesting play on all of those ideas in the development of the capital city and the buildings. So I just wanted to interject that, because now we'll probably see a lot more of the esoteric side of that than what I know.
Yeah, well, so if you want to put this on the screen, here's Versailles from Google Earth, and this is very much like kind of the layout you were showing before. I mean, I haven't spent enough time here looking at these kind of magic squares in the gardens, and this pentacle and this diamond. This Google Earth allowing me to align to the cardinal directions now, right? So you can see that Versailles, like general azimuth or compass heading, is not cardinal. Like Google Earth actually let me play and would just kind of track this line and see what it's up to. And it's 112 and a half degrees, or 112 degrees. So that means like 22 degrees south of east or north of west. And it's kind of just intriguing to know, like, well, where does that go? And what were they aligning that with, And so these are the kinds of things that I'll do at Washington, D.C. And if we look at Meridian in Washington, D.C., like that's a north-south line, right? So that's like one of the places where D.C. definitely does have a compass alignment. I shouldn't even say compass, because that's the true directions, not the magnetic directions, right? But in DC, we're going to kind of play with this particular compass that you see here, just like you see in Versailles, right? And as we go to the White House, which is in this direction on the compass, that's where we get to this place of Meridian, where we can go due north of there and get to the so-called the real White House, as some people call it. I'm like actually lost. Oh wait, I'm going the wrong direction. So there's a compass that heads that way, and then there's the compass that heads this way. And so one coming down to the Jefferson Memorial, which, as I said, is new, like that used to be underwater. And I see that I was actually looking out of the White House before accidentally, instead of out of the Capitol building, right? And you can see, and I'll outline this later, like pentacles in these streets and whatnot. But this is Meridian that goes north of the White House. And it comes up here to Meridian Park. So this is where we find this statue of Joan of Arc. And I wanted to come here just to show you as well. There's a 13-stage fountain. This image was taken when the water wasn't running. Here's the Joan of Arc statue here. You can see the shadow cast. And then there's this 13-stage fountain that's descending from a higher elevation to the fountain itself. So water runs down this way. And perhaps you can see that kind of looks like an Egyptian ankh. And they actually have papyrus and lotus in the fountain, which some suggest were two plants that were used to make like a spiritual medicine. Like some of you will be familiar with two plants that are necessary to come together, and some of the Amazonian tools that many have used to open their minds a bit. All right, well, I'm just looking at time and realizing we better move forward. So yeah, it's intriguing again to know that DC has this meridian, and up at the top of Meridian Park, we see the statue of Joan of Arc. And I can't wait to ask you all about Joan of Arc sometime. And I mean, my feeling is this, and she's, by the way, looking right up at where Orion culminates, like at the altitude that Orion culminates in the south when looking from DC. And I feel that she's very much holding the posture of Orion as well. So let's move forward. This is the goddess America, a 19-foot bronze statue who stands on top of the Capitol building. And now there's a law that no statue in DC is allowed to exceed her height. So some say this is America, some call her Liberty. This is like a kind of a modern goddess. Some wonder if it's meant to be Athena, who we see certainly honored perhaps as the patron of Washington, D.C., as she was in Athens. Her gaze is facing, they say, and I'd have to go up there to know, but the place where the summer solstice sun rises. I'm actually just walking around DC and working with shadows during certain times of the year. I don't think that's right. Her shoulders are definitely facing due east, so facing the equinox. But I think her face might be oriented more towards the cross quarter sunrises, like when the sun's at 15 Taurus and 15 Leo. And there's a lot of cross quarter alignment in DC. But these are these lines from this goddess standing on top of the Capitol building. And one, as we see, like down into the right, that would be where her face is oriented. And so some say that's like the direction of the summer solstice sunrise. If so, it would have to be like after the sun rises above the horizon and climbs a ways. That's perhaps how it's working on this line that's going down into the left as you're looking at it. That's like southeast, because it said that this winter solstice sun will illuminate the flame at the peak of the Capitol, or sorry, the Library of Congress building, which is across the street. And, that's newer than the White House. There was a Library of Congress that was in the Capitol building. But in the War of 1812, like the British burned that and burned Jefferson's library that he had donated for that cause. So over here in the Library of Congress now, in the places that you're allowed to tour, you'll find a replica of the Jefferson Library. And by the way, if you ever go there, go into the center of it and clap. It is the coolest acoustics room I've ever heard, ever. I just say from here, this is Pennsylvania Ave that goes up to the White House. And interestingly, the White House is said to be the executive branch, right? So the president, and then the Capitol, the House, right? We the people. And there's meant to be a clear view between the two. Like that's part of checks and balances in the way that it's built into the DC streets. Well, Andrew Jackson had the Treasury building built right in between. So no longer can the Capitol, we the people, and the White House, the president, see one another visibly. Right. And just stop this because I want to see your face in reaction to that, Anne. But like, that's a terrible thing that they put the money
Exactly.
in these two branches of the governance, right?
That's crazy. Yeah. Isn't that interesting for today's world? That is really what gets in between everything, right? Is the money. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, always looking at the geometry of this, I always think back to all of the, Plato and these ancient mathematicians and all of the things that I don't necessarily remember from my geometry, but all of those shapes have meaning, right? So wherever they're placing certain objects on the shape matters as well. And I was looking at where the mall, which was supposed to be the public area, right, where the mall is in relation to the Capitol building and the White House, it sort of serves as the base of one of those triangles, right? So I was wondering about the significance of that.
Yeah,
Not
and
that you've
there's
ever
this
thought of it.
Pythagorean triangle that runs in that direction, which is due west from the Capitol. The Capitol building, again, like that's the center of the diamond. That's where the
Yeah.
compass rose is, right? That's like the center. And so when I'm working star alignments, for the most part, I'm always using the Capitol building as my origin. So I don't think I have slides for this, but for example, the Pentagon, right? Which, by the way, they say is not constructed using so-called British measurements of feet, inches, etc., or the metric system, but rather the megalithic yard. which Alexander Thom found was a unit that was common to many of the stone circles in Brittany and in Britain and beyond, right? So that's intriguing. And
When was
FDR,
it built? When was the Pentagon built?
well, 40, the cornerstone ceremony was 9/11, and I can't remember the year, 1940. Some of them, I'm wondering if it's 42. I think it was 45. I think it was like shortly before the bombs and the end of World War II. Might have been 42. But it said that FDR, who was a 33rd degree master mason, right, like had it moved from where it was planned to be, like pretty late in the game, and angered a lot of folks in this. And the way it works now and then, and it won't be forever because of precession movement of the equinoxes and the stars, but from the Capitol building, you see the Scorpion constellation set on the Pentagon.
Wow.
And from the Pentagon, you see the Ram constellation rise on the Capitol building. And of course, the Scorpion and the Ram, traditionally associated with the signs of Scorpio and Aries, traditionally the two homes of Mars, the god of war. Right? So, like, this is how DC works. And that's a very modern addition to DC. There's many, by the way, like the Washington Monument, which is like this great phallus of DC, and that's definitely not in L'Enfant's plan. Like, he planned for a statue of Washington on horseback, where this gigantic obelisk is now. And by the way, if you're in DC, like, arrange ahead of time to take the tour in the Washington Monument, because you get up and you can take a view in all four directions from the top of the monument. But also when you're in the elevator ride coming down, you get to see all of these stones that were contributed by Masonic lodges from not only around the United States, but around the world. And you really start getting a deeper kind of insight into what, the mysteries of this place and who's building and who's involved in the design, et cetera, et cetera. But what was I going to say before? Oh, right. So, I think it was in the 2000s, there was a vesica, not quite a vesica piscis, right? Which is when we take two circles of the same radius and center them on each other's circumference, right? And then you get the mandorla or the yoni, the sacred gateway, through which all other geometries are built. But it's like this, I think. But it is like, we now have this pillar in the yoni, basically, in the DC design. And this is on like the backyard of the White House. It's like staring at this image, perhaps, and this is a big perhaps, but perhaps of sacred sexuality. So that's a pretty interesting thing. And if you want to take that a little further, go out the other way on Meridian, which heads up north to the Meridian Park, and look at the urns in the park right in front of the White House. And you'll see Pan chasing all of these nymphs around. Some pretty interesting and very evocative imagery in DC all over the place.
Yeah.
All right. Well, looking at time, once again, we better roll. Okay. So anyway, the Treasury building now blocking the view of the Capitol from the White House. What a shame. I think we're really feeling that, and just thinking about how many lobbyists are hanging out at this place, et cetera, et cetera. So, but in this design, it said that from the Capitol oculus, you can look to the winter solstice sun after rising from the horizon and coming up. It's said to illuminate this golden flame on top of the Library of Congress building, which is just the most amazing esoteric building that I've ever been in, frankly. And it's been a very important teacher for me. So we're going to enter. There's this triptych of doors out front, and above the doors are the muses, including Astronomia, Urania, who you can see here holding a globe with the zodiac, right? She's interesting, kind of pointing to Libra. But you can see the Scorpion and the Archer there, which I think are also very important. And by the way, she's gazing due north, and her head is elevated at an angle that's looking at the North Star.
Wow.
So we're inside the Library of Congress now. And at the top of the stairs, we find Minerva. And that's like a long tale that I'm not going to share here. I will say that she's holding a scroll with the sacred sciences that do not include astrology, but I believe it's in like the rolled up bit because she's standing in the staircase above this. Like at the floor of the Library of Congress, there's the zodiac laid out on this square. And this has been maybe literally my most important teacher besides plant medicine as to what the zodiac actually is. I thought perhaps it was just a line weird or wrong or something when I first got there, but then I learned and saw that it's completely directionally configured. So for example, where you see Virgo and Libra up there, they're centered around that rose, which is due west. And as I shared before, that equinox point, which I like to call west equinox, the tropical cusp of Virgo and Libra, that place where the ecliptic or the plane of the year souths across the equator, it's due west of the center of the earth. And in this way works in a sense like a global descendant. There's so many mysteries revealed in this building, including this star at the center, which has like binary code, right? Like you can see the compass rose, which is 4, the cross quarter is the 8. There's 32 and 64. 32 is a number the Masons love. But there's also this serpentine shape with 19 coils. And 19 is the year, well, it's the synchronicity or the synchronization of the polyrhythms of the solar year. So Earth, Sun, and the lunation, Earth, Moon, Sun. So there's 235 new moons and lunations in 19 years, the so-called metonic cycle. And that's all encoded here in DC. I mean, this place is so amazing. So we're going to look the other way now. Well, we're actually going to look from the far west. So this is a newer building that certainly wasn't in L'Enfant's plan either. This is the Abe Lincoln Memorial. And we're looking from Lincoln's view. If anybody's been there, and this is where so many great demonstrations are happening, and some maybe not great ones too. And we're seeing a bunch of orange cones instead of water. I need to change pictures here, but that's the reflecting pool that he's looking at. And you know, the Lincoln Memorial is intriguing too. Like many of us have seen that it looks a lot like the Emperor card from the Rider-Waite Tarot. I mean, look at the feet, right? It's like the Pisces part. But this is also the Emperor card's the Aries card, and I want to invoke that because again, the Pisces Aries cusp of the tropical zodiac is due east of the center of the earth. Lincoln is looking due east at that Washington Monument there and beyond to the Capitol building. All right. And in our day and age, and this is a very important part of our experience of the heavens at the time of our incarnation, Orion's belt is aligned to the equator. And that means that Orion's belt rises due east and sets due west. From the northern hemisphere point of view, the belt of Orion rises like this, rises like a pillar of stars. And I believe, and you know, I can't prove this to be true, but I believe that much of the layout, and maybe not even in L'Enfant's original plan, where this is certainly cardinal, like this is the mall is a east-west line, but I believe that the builders have basically aligned to Orion over time. And that part of the Washington Monument's idea of having this pillar is about this pillar of stars, Orion's belt, which rises. And this is, again, only in our day and age of precession, the 26,000 year great year. In the northern hemisphere view, Orion's belt rises like a pillar, and then it sets kind of horizontally into the horizon. And this is like another really important piece of the puzzle here. Okay, so from the Capitol building, you're looking due west at the Washington Monument and then the Lincoln Memorial beyond. right? And then this street, Pennsylvania Avenue, heads to the White House, Maryland Avenue in the other direction to the Jefferson Memorial, which you can see in the screen. All of these buildings, well, the Lincoln Memorial, the Jefferson Memorial, were modeled on temples from Rome and Greece, respectively, right? Parthenon and Pantheon. This is an overhead of that scene. So out of the Capitol building, we see the Mason's compass, right? One of two geometer's tools, the other one being the square. And it's opened up to an angle that is actually lesser than that, which like the Freemason compass is typically drawn. So I had to squeeze this thing a bit. I'm highlighting like one of the pentacles in DC and putting that star not on Meridian Park, but something 1 mile due north of the White House, which is the headquarters of Scottish Rites Freemasonry, the so-called House of the Temple, which is an interesting thing to observe. You can see the Pentagon, by the way, in the upper left of this image as well.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to see that those compass lines, so from the Capitol building, Pennsylvania Avenue, towards the northwest, and Maryland Avenue towards the southwest, or in other words, towards the northwest or the right of this frame, the White House, and towards the left of this frame, southwest, the Jefferson Memorial. Well, in our day and age, that's the setting of Aldebaran, the Eye of the Bull, in Sirius, right? The brightest star of our sky. Now, importantly, and David Ovison points this out in The Secret Architecture of Our Nation's Capital, he doesn't point out something that would happen every day of basically forever, unless the comet hits us again, which is that the cross-quarter suns also set on these compass headings or azimuths. So where Aldebaran is setting in our day and age, this is like a really amazing part of our time in precession as well. When the sun's at 15 Taurus or 15 Leo, it sets in that same place. And when the sun's at 15 Scorpio or 15 Tropical Aquarius, it sets like where Sirius sets in our day and age. Ovison also doesn't point out the thing that I think is perhaps most important here, which is that in our day and age, and again, this changes with precession, Orion's belt sets due west. So if this is a star alignment, like beyond the big star, that of ours, the one we call Sun, I believe it's not only about Aldebaran and Sirius, Aldebaran being one of the four royal stars, Sirius being the brightest star of our sky and the star at the heart of so many of the mystery traditions, right? In one of those, it said that Asur, the one that most of us know as Osiris, right after his death, was resurrected in the heavens as the stars that most of us now call Orion, and that his queen, his sister, his consort, Isis, was then, after her transition, stationed in the heavens as Sirius, so that they travel together through the heavens, right? But we have these alignments that in our day and age, and this will change with precession, align with Aldebaran, the Eye of the Bull, with the setting of Orion, especially the belt of Orion, and then with Sirius. And again, from the kind of right to the left, this would be, from the Capitol building's point of view, the White House, Washington Monument, Jefferson Memorial.
Mm-hmm.
And we can also see here the cross, just like we saw at Versailles, Anne. And when we zoom in a bit, we're going to see that this is, so you can see the vesica there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Washington monuments. And you can see, by the way, the shadow of the monument at this point pointing to the White House.
Yeah.
Pretty intriguing thing. Any obelisk like this can work like a sundial, right? Now, it's not going to point to the White House at solar noon. In the northern hemisphere, places like DC, the sun souths at midday, and so the shadow at midday, right, true solar noon, the sun at the MC, the shadow points north, points on a meridian, but it doesn't point on meridian because that meridian runs through the White House. And as you can see here, it runs also to the Jefferson Memorial. But the Washington Monument is displaced from that meridian. There's actually a plaque down there in the grass, Jefferson Pier, where they show the point that is on the meridian. And when you take the tour, you're told that the Washington Monument was not placed on that red line or on that meridian as we see it in the screen, because the land, which is all reclaimed land, right? This was all Potomac River, like swampland. It couldn't support the massive weight of this gigantic obelisk of DC. Right? So that L'Enfant plan, this Washington riding a horse statue, they say would be right there. But we can't say that it was meant to be between the White House and the Jefferson Memorial, because again, Jefferson Memorial is not in the plan, because that was literally just Potomac River, right?
Mm-hmm.
I have a feeling that the Washington Monument's displaced from that meridian line for a very different reason. And it's all about Orion. Because when we take Orion's belt stars, we can see that just like the pyramids at Giza, which do this actually more precisely and also do this amazingly with magnitude, like the size of the pyramids at Giza also, as above, so below, correspond to the relative brightness or magnitude of the three stars of Orion's belt. And that was something that Robert Bravall first brought forth in the kind of Orion correlation of Giza, which of course the quackademics very much resist. But these DC folks, this tradition goes back to Kemet, the land we now call Egypt, at least. And I just can't not see that these three temples in Washington, D.C., the White House, the Washington Monument, and the Jefferson Memorial, they, like the Great Pyramids at Giza, bring as above, so below the geometry of Orion's belt onto Earth.
Wow.
So let me bring you now inside the Capitol building, which I feel is the place that most supports my Orion theory for DC. And when I first went here, I was very grateful to have experienced the work of William Henry, who kind of speaks about this Capitol dome as a stargate for all of us to work on our ascension. So I went in there, I was a little bit less like, this is some kind of Masonic mind control thing, to what is this, and a little bit more open, and had a look around. So I'm going to show you a couple things that you can all see, and then I'll tell you about a dream I had the night I first visited. Intriguingly, in the frieze of the Capitol Rotunda, we see many different images of so-called contact, right? In other words, conquest. So this one is Montezuma the second being visited by Cortez, which, by the way, never happened. All right. And there's images like this all around the frieze. There's only one more modern image, because it said that Constantine Brumidi, who painted them, didn't do the geometry right. And so there was this space where now you get a picture of the Wright brothers in their first plane. All right, celebrating obviously innovation of the Americas and such, right? Well, behind Montezuma on this throne in this painting by Brumidi, who, by the way, was broken out of the Vatican prison to be brought to the United States to paint first a church in New York and then all of this images in the Capitol. I mean, not everything, but definitely the painting at the top of the Capitol dome that we're going to spend some time with in the frieze here. And then, the hallways where we see zodiacs all over the place. There's this interesting image of this woman in the kind of forefront of this painting in the frieze that it's that kind of priestess vibe, right? And it's like an image of a cross of four. But look at how behind Montezuma, there's a Meshica sunstone. Right now, many people kind of falsely showed that as the 13 monk Baktun long count calendar that, some math suggested cycle that December solstice 2012, right? And that's not the Mayan calendar. This is a Mexica calendar. Many people know that as like the Aztec people, right? Like discovered in Tenochtitlan, like underneath modern Mexico City. You can go visit it there. But what is that doing in the US Capitol freeze, right? Especially knowing that that sunstone is um, an amazing, I'll say technology, but at least calendar of precession, of the turning of the ages, of the time of the five suns. So
Mhm.
we go now and we lay on our back here and we look to this strange painting at the Capitol Dome, right? Like, what is going on here? You're looking at what's called the apotheosis of George Washington. This is George Washington becoming a god, yes? He's in military regalia, sitting between these angels. He's got his hand pointed in an interesting mudra to an open book, which is an ancient symbol of the secrets revealed. Okay, he's sitting on a rainbow, which is pretty interesting because it's something we often see in images of the second coming of Christ, where Christ is typically sitting above an angel, either with a sword or a spear or scales or something like this. And you can see Orion in the George Washington in the apotheosis sitting above this angel or this goddess America, who's the only one here that is not one of the ancient Greco-Roman gods or goddesses. Okay. Before I describe who they are, I just want to point out that there are 72 stars, right? So 72 years per 1 degree of precession. And it's my belief that they're speaking of this turning of the ages and this mystery of precession and what sits now on Orion's club, who clearly you can see America taking the form of, right? So the dream I had the day I visited this for the first time with my eyes open, it's one of only 2 times that I can remember that Hermes visited me in a dream. And he simply said, you know what you were looking at, right? And I was like, oh, right. Because this is the sacred hoop of stars. Modern astronomers call this the winter hexagon, right? And so where Mercury here is at the top, which is said to be commerce, and he's hanging a bag of gold to one of the founding fathers, right? That aligns to the Gemini twins constellation of the heavens. To our right, you see Vulcan or Hephaestus, so that's said to be industry, while Mercury is said to be commerce. In the other direction, we see Neptune and Aphrodite, or Poseidon, Aphrodite, Neptune, and Venus, and that's said to be marine. Beneath, you see Athena hanging out with Ben Franklin, so Athena or Minerva, right? And the rainbow running beneath Washington and heading over to Ceres, who's there, interestingly, with 7 figures like the 7 stars, the Pleiades, which sit on the back of the bull. And all of this is constellationally aligned. I had to tweak things just a little bit, but really not so much at all. And it's my feeling that Auriga, or the charioteer, is aligned with Hephaestus or Vulcan quite intentionally. And that Mercury with the twins, and you can see twin angels beneath him. That so-called maritime or Poseidon is there as Procyon, the Bohemian star, the magical star, but the so-called little dog, because in the great competition to receive the patronage of the city where democracy would be born, that was Athens, of course, Athena was the victor, right? And she defeated Poseidon. You see that actually invoked in the Library of Congress across the street, and in other places in DC. That Ceres or Demeter is aligned with the bull because this is agriculture, right? But where is George Washington? So he maps to Betelgeuse, the right shoulder of Orion, but he's also because Orion's so large, where we see Regal, or the star of the sacred hoop, at America, this goddess beneath, in a sense, we see that Washington also is that one who sits at the right hand of the mighty one, right? Who sits on the rainbow of stars at the right club of Orion. So I just want to show you a few images there, and I just want to see if you want to check in at all. And I also need to send a text to a client just to say I'm going to be a little bit late.
Okay, so so here's something that I've wondered about since I read this article. In the design of the Capitol building itself, there was a little bit of controversy over how the design would work, and Jefferson wanted the columns to be Roman and not Greek. And whoever was building it at that point, I don't remember which person it is, he really wanted to use a Greek column as part of the design. So that was one of the controversies, that Jefferson was really adamant that it should all stay Roman in design. Even if it didn't work logistically, it couldn't be built soundly by doing it the way that they originally had envisioned it. So that's all on the outside of the building. Okay, so that's one thing. But also, Thomas Jefferson really wanted the Capitol building to represent the temple of Castor and Pollux.
Interesting.
And he was argued down. So why did he want that? So if we imagine the Capitol building, and always there's sort of this tension with Jefferson wanting something slightly different. So besides that, why do you think he would have wanted that particular temple?
Why do I think that?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it might have something to do with those stars. It might have something to do with the twins being, well, first of all, there were twins, right? Because they had sisters who, like them, were a pair, with one of them being heavenly and the other one not, or I should say divine, because Polydeuces, or Pollux, was the son of Zeus, right? But the father of Castor was Tyndareus, the king of Sparta, right? And so there might be something there as well, of like bringing the mortal and divinity together, which lives in the tale of the twins. I mean, they also had, many great stories, like they were members of the quest for the golden fleece and more. I imagine there's also, however, like a spatial and star alignment there too, right?
Yeah.
What would you say, Anne, or what have you come across?
I don't know. I'm thinking about whether that's significant for Jefferson in terms of his own personal astrology. I don't think it is. But what I see is also there's this tension between wanting to connect with values over men, and this emphasis on Orion to me, and the fact that Washington is often connected with Orion. And I mean, although it seems like Joan of Arc is sort of representing that in a different place, I think there's a tension also of Jefferson not wanting everything to be connected to a man, and instead wanting it to be connected to larger values. And Jefferson also is not a Mason of all these people.
Yeah, I think that's wrong. So
Well,
many
doesn't come
Masons,
down
by
to
the
it.
way, we don't know that they were Masons, but I don't know. I mean, he was definitely a student of the mystery traditions, no doubt. So let me
Right.
show you
Yeah.
why actually the Temple of Castor and Pollux, because where Orion points his club, Castor kicks, and show you why this is so important in our day and age as well, as we wrap this thing up. And that's
Okay.
intriguing to hear. And will you send me a link about that?
Yeah, I have an article that I can send you about it.
Thank you. So I don't know if you can see my mouse circling around here. But basically, I've just configured this in DC so that the galactic anti-center, right? So this is exactly opposite galactic center, is at the meridian or culminating in a particular moment cast. But this painting, I believe, of the apotheosis of George Washington, where we have the charioteer, so Hephaestus, and then the twins, where Mercury is, Procyon, that image of Poseidon and Aphrodite. Here's Sirius, which would have been Athena or Minerva in that image. Regal is where America is, and then Washington is at Betelgeuse, the shoulder of Orion, but also kind of symbolically sitting on Orion's club, which points to the ecliptic plane or the sun's path. Just to finish the mix, here's Aldebaran and the Pleiades. So this would be where Ceres is in that image of the apotheosis of Washington, right? So the golden curve you see here, that's the path of the sun through Earth's sky, or the Earth-Sun plane, the ecliptic, the plane of the year, the heart of the zodiac, okay? And we're going to bring in some planets here. Well, first, I guess I just want to show you this image again. And like from Lakota star knowledge, this is the sacred hoop. They tell us this is where our souls come in from. And that, by the way, you can read in a great book called Lakota Star Knowledge by Randall Goodman, where he was sitting with elders in this tradition who were telling him about the star tradition. And so we hear about the sacred hoop, also called the racetrack, which is aligned to a wonderful story I don't have time to tell right now. But as above, so below, like all of those stars also have homes on Earth. So like what people these days call Devil's Tower was known as the Bear's Den. And the Bear's Den in the heavens is what we call the Twins constellation. Okay. So you can see them kind of configured to a very important point here. Now, it's said that our souls come in from this place, but that also when we die, we will move back through the hoop to be purified, that it's the Inipi, or the sweat lodge in the sky. Over to the left, you see the fire pit where the stones are heated to bring into the sweat lodge. Well, most of us know that as the head of the lion, the celestial lion, right? You see the elk on the right, that's the fishes constellation, and much more. But there's so many different origin traditions around Sirius or the Pleiades or other points of the sky here, which surround the galactic gate, which is opposite galactic center. So I'm going to bring in some planets here as they were on July 4th, 1776. And there are all these planets, the sun included, Jupiter, Venus next to Jupiter. You can't see Mercury, but he's over here. But very importantly, Mars. Mars, like right at the center of the sacred hoop at this time when they were declaring war, right?
Mm.
And so if this was elected, I believe it was elected astronomically, right? And you can see here in the 1776 chart, Mars in tropical Gemini, but also in constellational Bull. We'll look at Castor and Pollux, all right?
Mm-hmm.
So Jupiter, Venus, the sun, completely in constellational twins, right? So we would see that as sidereal Gemini, but I'll just say constellational twins because I like to work with tropical signs and constellations. And I believe the ancients did as well. I shouldn't say the ancients, the forefathers did as well. 12 years later, which is a Jupiter cycle, really 11.86 years, the Constitution, September 17th, 1786. Look at where Jupiter is. I mean, just right on the hand of the high man. And by the way, there's that Castor and Pollux. Castor is kicking Jupiter. I don't think they elected this because it's a time when Mars came through. That happens about every 2 years, but Jupiter every 12. And while the Declaration of Independence might have been like, it had to happen, the Constitution is a time that they could have elected like more purposefully, right? And I believe they literally were electing this to put Jupiter right on Orion's club. And in that painting, which was painted much later than this, right, that would be basically where George Washington is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how about George Washington's death, which happened the next time Jupiter got back to the hand of the high man in this river of stars? So to go back to where I began, right, you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One.
Yeah.
And I believe Washington may have elected his strange death, where he was out, the story goes he's out working the land, and Martha's like, "You're getting a little too old for that." And he's like, "I can do anything," right? And he gets super sick because it's frozen in December of 1799 in Mount Vernon. And in fact, it's so frozen that his doctor can't get to him and he falls ill. So, like, the local hack comes by and basically leeched him to death. So I don't know how you could estimate this, but it's been estimated that a third of his blood was leached out of him, and turns out you need blood to live. But I kind of wonder if he was like, "Look, the stargate's open, like Jupiter's back on the hand of the high man." Well, that happens every 12 years. I'm gonna go back to the 1776 chart and take the supersize away from the planets here, so you can see a very important part of the code in regards to our day and age. This blue curve that just came in, this is the galactic equator. All right, so every star we see in our sky is of the Milky Way. But this band of stars, the river of stars, that's like the central plane of the Milky Way, right? And on the opposite side of where we are looking right now, that's near the galactic center. So that GA right there, that's galactic anticenter. That's like the point exactly opposite of the center of the galaxy. Well, what I want to show you here is that Cancer glyph, which in 7076 was right there in the foot of Castor. Okay, well, this is going to precess or move in a retrograde motion through the stars. So we're going to go 200 years later to the bicentennial in 1976, and notice that that Cancer glyph is now very close to this galactic cross, the place where the ecliptic, the plane of our solar system, is intersecting the Milky Way equator, the plane of our galaxy. All right. Well, this perfected some years later in 1998. This is something that my first teacher, Daniel Gemario, really brought our awareness to. And it's something I really suggest you read about in the wonderful text called Galactic Alignment by the late, great John Major Jenkins. That in 1998, so obviously, in this day and age into which we incarnated, we had this solstice alignment. That's Earth's North Pole leaning towards this place where the plane of the year, the ecliptic, the plane of our solar system, crosses the galactic equator. On the other side, near galactic center, that alignment is happening in 0 tropical Capricorn, the place that Earth's south pole eternally leans. And this is why I'm saying this is like part 3 of a long course that I teach, where you first have to understand what the constellational zodiac, the sidereal zodiacs are, the tropical zodiac, to understand more about the turning of the ages, how we look to the Aries point for this, but also if we look north, as I believe the Bible is encouraging us to do, we get to see this amazing image of galactic alignment that I also believe this processional star clock painting at the Capitol Rotunda is directing our gaze towards. All right, well, one more thing. We're going to go to 2025. And you can see now that that Cancer degree, the 0 Cancer degree, the Tropic of Cancer, which is the point of the zodiac that's most north of the equator, that's in blue at the bottom here. You can see how the equator is going through Orion's belt in our day and age. That changes with precession. This is why Orion's belt in our day and age rises like a pillar in the east and sets horizontally, like White House, Lincoln Memorial, and Jefferson Memorial in the west. But now 0 Cancer has precessed through that galactic gate. We're certainly still in the timing of it. Maybe 50 years before and after 1998 would be a decent time to use, or 36 before and after. But why 2025? And the reason is this. Let's bring the planets in, and you're going to see that Jupiter is once again very close to the hand of the high man. Now, that alignment is happening actually as you and I are speaking, and or actually maybe some weeks ago in Jupiter and breast cancer, because in our day and age, zero Cancer is on this galactic gate on the hand of the high man, which is kicked by this temple of Castor and Pollux, let's call it. This is Castor's foot, kicks zero Cancer in our day and age, right? But why am I showing July 4th, 2025? Well, this would be the 249th solar return of the United States. I'm showing 3 different solar returns of the US here, and I'm actually going to just strip this down to the Sun and Jupiter. Because Jupiter and the Sun have an 83-year period, right? So we often speak of Jupiter as a 12-year thing. It's actually 11.86 years. As you gain some wisdom and wrinkles, that difference starts really mattering. The true sacred number of Jupiter is 83. Cast your 83rd solar return chart, like for the US, that would be in 1859, and you're going to see that Jupiter comes and gets reconfigured almost precisely at solar return time. 83 years later, 1942. 83 years later, 2025. So I've been sharing this information and freaking out for some time of holy shit, just like the Civil War was building here in 1859. That's like John Brown's body, right? And in 42, which is like Pearl Harbor, and the US brought into World War II, right? What's happening in 2025? I'm going to show just another image here, which is that there's an 84-year pattern, which is 7/12s, and it's not Jupiter. Jupiter is 83. The 84-year cycle is Uranus. And so here in 1860, we see the first of actually 3 1860 to 1861 Uranus returns to the United States 1776 chart. The second of those, and I think there was only one instead of a retrograde pass and a third direct pass, that was May 30th, 1944. And then here's the first of 3 that's coming July 26, 2027. So bring in some of the other planets there. This is, and what I was hoping we could spend some time and I could ask you about more of 1859, 1860, 1861 kind of Civil War times, and then 1942, 44, 45, World War II times, and sadly the A-bombs. And then this time now. But if you'd like to go there, I'd have to do it another time. So I just want to share once again, you can find me at GeminiBrett.com, learn more about the School of Astrology, our constellations community. And again, I'm going to be taking some time and building this up from step 1, which is like learning the directions. What's the difference between the constellational, the sidereal, the tropical zodiac, so we can see this mechanism of the turning of the ages, so we can look east at the Aries point where Saturn and Neptune are now, so we can look north and south at the solstice points, north where Jupiter is now, and see in some of these esoteric codes. We'll go to Chartres in France as well. I got to check out Versailles. Really glad that you brought us there before, because I'm like, oh, I got to spend some time there. But in so many of these esoteric places, they're aligning to the stars, but I think they're also foretelling something. And oddly, that card is now being called. If I'm right about DC, it's literally speaking about these eclipses of 82, of 2001, of 2020, about this time that we are incarnated into. And I'm most intrigued by this US Jupiter return, which is July 4th, 2025. And I wish in Jupiterian way I could say this is just going to be an opportunity of great benevolence. I think it can be for sure, but I'm a little worried about history repeating itself.
Right. Well, I mean, I think what's common with all of these times is that the nation is challenged, and so far it's come through each time, right? And it's challenged in different ways, and it would be interesting to look at the astrology of what is each of those Jupiter returns particularly highlighting. What is it that's being challenged? And I've talked a lot about this with David, with the Leo King, and our show History on the Stars. We've got a couple of episodes where we look at the Civil War. But I mean, I feel like it'd be interesting to even look back every time Jupiter is in that spot. What was happening in Britain? Well, I mean, there's so many connections backwards and forwards, right? It's just so intriguing. But to think that the Capitol building basically has the star map of the nation's creation on the dome, right? Or on the ceiling. And
Yeah, I mean, you can't see the planets there necessarily, but I'm sure this is describing this place of space where so many planets were in 1776, and then
mhm,
12 years later for the Constitution and Washington's strange death. I mean, as I'm looking at the 83-year pattern of Jupiter, that's a tropical Jupiter return. And so eventually, where those 5-degree Cancer tropical Jupiter points are, it's going to move all the way through the hoop. We'd have to look at a sidereal or like a star based zodiac Jupiter return to kind of keep him right in that place where he was at the signing of the Declaration. I'd say, like, most intriguingly at the Constitution, where it is right on Orion's
mhm,
club. Like, I can do that also, though, and I totally agree with you. How intriguing would it be to go back 12-ish years before 1776, or maybe 83 years before, and just see if there's a wave? Because I mean, I have to keep the faith in a generally optimistic leaning that we're going to break through all this madness to something more beautiful on the other side. But I feel like if the leaders of our day were utilizing the so-called tomb beneath the painting for something other than a closet for brooms, maybe we'd have a better chance. But it's also hard to say. When you look at some of the esoteric tradition, like, people speak about how this land was preserved for the new age. And it's like,
mhm.
so they waited to come here. It's like people were already here, right?
Exactly.
And this nation has the blood of genocide. And, I didn't say this, but this is one of the things I was like, I'm not going to say this right now, but like, in front of the Capitol building, it was like a slave market,
Mhm.
right? In the swamps of early DC. Like, so it's like, how can we ever like cleanse from that and realign this effort? And I'm like, I believe that can happen, and that this is
Mhm.
a time of like some really important purging and composting, so we can find some rich soil to plant like new seeds. But I
Right.
do feel also that will require a return to part of the intention of what this project was about in the first place. Like, it is a
Mhm.
place where freedom was eventually found, and right, women gained the right to vote and all sorts of things. And if the republic, which so many people want to call it democracy, but like, if the republic could actually be kind of realigned according to that original vision, maybe
Mhm.
we get back on track. But
Yeah, I think about this too, and in researching for this, show, I just kept getting a sense of how in tune we were at one point with the divine order, and this idea of trying to bring the divine down to earth, but also on earth reflecting something that would be divine, or having a sense of being connected to the larger cosmos. And I wonder whether we have that anymore, or has the money gotten in the way? Has corporations, or whatever it is, there's not that same order. It's not as apparent that people are thinking of divine connections. But I guess
yeah.
that's what you're doing. You're helping to bring this back. People like
Well,
you.
and as are you, and I'd say we are, right? And so the people who are tuning into this are doing it in your own way. Like, I was just invited by a group of folks who are like working the energy grid in DC and like
Mm,
dowsing consistently. Like, this is meant to be about we the people. So as
right.
we the people like realign to the old ways, which, like, I wasn't initiated in some order that taught me this. I'm having to find my way there, and many of us are, and we're each doing it our own way. Like, the greatest way that we can fight back is to not fight, but rather open the heart. And as we do that, as we align, it's like, standing vows to the marriage of heaven and earth, each in our own way, like this rose will bloom. Right. And so I think that's the important thing to remember when we get afraid or feel that there's nothing that we can do, that as you do you, and with every decision you make, you do right the ship. You know what I mean? And I do think there's something written in the stars, and there's something very purposefully and pointedly aligned. And yeah, that's also when I can become, I'd say, like patriotic in the way that I want to be. And yeah, it's my hope that spreading this information will inspire people to look at that city and other places, and most importantly, like align their own temple, right? And align their own base to the beautiful marriage of heaven and earth. And with that, I must disappear in a puff of
Yes.
smoke.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. And for everybody out there, I'm not sure when I'll be back and with what show, but just in the meantime, stay curious, and we'll see you later.
Thank you,
Bye.
Anne. Bye-bye.